everybody. Welcome to another edition of From the Other Sideline, brought to you by Frogs Today. With football season fully in the rear view, at least until signing day and spring ball, we are turning our attention on this show to basketball season. And in order to kick off our official dive into TCU hoops, I brought on one of the experts, somebody who knows this team, has followed them very closely over the last 3 years, and I would say is connected to TCU basketball as anybody that I know. I promise he's there behind the screenshot and the darkened screen right now, but we are happy to be joined by Colin Post, TCU alum, TCU 360 alum, and current writer for 247 Sports. Colin, how are you doing today?
Melissa, I'm doing great. Sorry about that. I just went on a run, so we're here talking about TCU hoops, but I promise you would rather look at that headshot than what I look like right now. So
yeah, this is my bad for not giving Colin. Hoops. Yeah, did not give Colin a heads up. Colin, as we are recording this, the day after what is arguably the greatest regular season win in TCU history, can you kind of just talk us through where that Kansas victory at Lawrence, in Lawrence, ranks over like recent TCU history as far as regular season wins and what that kind of means for the program on a national scale?
Absolutely. And I tweeted these things yesterday, but I just think some really important perspective for fans to know about this win is, one, the obvious factor of having never won at Allen Fieldhouse is a huge deal. This is, West Virginia, places like West Virginia, Oklahoma, Texas, all get props for having great environments, and they really do. TCU's never won at West Virginia, for instance. But nationally, Allen Fieldhouse is recognized by everyone as one of, if not the best arenas and environments in the nation. And yesterday was no different. I mean, our friend Jamie Plunkett was there, and he was saying it was deafening. Like, he could barely hear himself think, yet TCU came in and produced the second largest loss in the Self era in Allen Fieldhouse. It was just absolutely unreal. And I think when you think about TCU versus Kansas, TCU's only beaten Kansas at all, not just at Allen, but at all 4 times ever. And 3 of those have come under head coach Jamie Dixon, and now the one away victory. This was also the largest margin of victory in an away Big 12 game for TCU in TCU history. I mean, just some really big numbers that were broken yesterday, and almost what seemed like a curse for TCU in that arena was ended. And I think there are a lot of interesting factors that we'll get into that, but this win was not one person showing out. It was very complete, and that's how they did it. And I think that's why we saw the ceiling of how good this team can really be.
And you segued me perfectly into my next point, is a lot of this game was billed going into it as kind of the 2 leading candidates for player of the year in the Big 12 conference, Mike Miles for TCU and Jalen Wilson for Kansas. Jalen Wilson's on a tear, 38-point game leading up to the TCU game and scored 30, I think 21 in the second half Saturday against the Frogs. But Mike has shown a much more well-rounded game, and maybe it's because he doesn't have to, carry the bulk of the scoring. But when you look at those 2 players and the other contenders for player of the year, where do you rank Miles kind of in that conversation as we kind of near the halfway point of the league season?
Yeah, that's a great question, Melissa, because I think what stands out about Jalen Wilson is just his ability to consistently score. He's a forward, and, I think he's like 6'8", 6'7", 6'8", very, very big guy, but he can move like a guard. He shoots like a shooting guard. So he's really just a really talented scorer. However, I also think you can throw Marquise Noel in there for Kansas State. He actually, ironically, did not have a very good game in that big win against Kansas, but he's been on a tear since Big 12 play. But I think what separates Miles from all of those is, yes, the 19 points per game, flirting with 20 points a game is something that TCU legend Desmond Bane actually never did for a full season. So if Miles is able to finish around that 20-point mark, I mean, that would just be so impressive. But what's most impressive to me are 2 things about Mike's season, and which is why I've kind of been telling people, as someone who's followed him very closely these 3 years, is he's much more efficient this year. He's shooting career high 53%, which is about 10% higher than Wilson and about 8% higher than Noel. And he's much better defensively. If you remember when Mike came into at TCU, I mean, his freshman year, he was like a wet piece of paper defensively. And I've kind of joked with him about that over the last couple of years, but slowly and surely he's become a much better on-ball defender, and he shows a lot more hustle. He's taken, I think, 8 or 9 charges this season already, and he's won the toughness award within TCU's practices 3 times already, only won it 2 times all of last season. So he's really stepping up as a leader. I think, like you said, this is a very well-rounded team, but this Mike Miles is a much more complete basketball player than I think we've seen by a couple steps, and I think it's really showing.
When he flirted with going to the NBA draft and he went through his evaluation process, that's a lot of what was talked about because he's not a really big guy. I mean, he's probably 6'1", right? Would be, he's physically he plays a lot bigger than that, but he needed to showcase that he could match up with some of the bigger guards on the perimeter in the NBA in order to be a draftable prospect. As he's done that, and he's also, I think, become more of a playmaker this year than we've seen. Previously, like so much of the onus was on him to score. He's shown he can still do that kind of at will, but he's also gotten a lot better at not just setting his teammates up directly, but kind of that Gretzky assist type player, the pass that leads to the assist. Do you think that what he's doing this season makes him a legitimate, almost guaranteed first round draft prospect, or are there things that he still needs to work on his game in order to be a top shelf NBA prospect this spring?
Yeah, I was talking to a scout actually a couple of weeks ago that really follows TCU and has been pretty high on Mike the last couple of years. And he said, based on the conversations he's had with other scouts, he still feels like Mike is kind of going under the radar, which I think games like yesterday helps a lot. Even though Mike only scored 15 points, he led the charge for that TCU team and the biggest win any college basketball program has had all year, and I mean that sincerely. And so I think Mike is starting to get more onto the national scene, which is really important. But as we've seen with TCU football this year, when you go to a school that's as small as TCU, it doesn't matter if you're first team All Big 12 or All American. What your coaches do to put you in the spotlight matters. And I think TCU basketball is still kind of learning that. And I think as far as his game goes, the 3-point shooting, I mean, he's shooting 31% right now, which is a little higher than last year, but that is something I think at only he's about 6'2", at only 6'2", Mike's going to need to be shooting in the high 30s, if not right around 40% once he gets to the league, if he wants to really be someone that plays a lot of time. We've seen that's how Desmond Bane, is someone who isn't able to get to the cup as well, is able to have such a great career in the NBA. And I think though Mike is such a great playmaker now at under 200 pounds, 6'2", getting to the rim is just not going to be consistently there for him against really strong and big NBA defenses. And so that'll be an added part of his game. But I do think he's going to need to improve that 3-point shooting. And off seasons can do that. Like I said, we saw it with Bane. I think he can do it too. And I would expect that he goes late first round if he keeps this pace up.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think he's an NBA player. Right now, he kind of gives me almost like a Davion Mitchell with the Sacramento Kings, and that's where I go because that's a Big 12 player that's playing for the NBA team I follow. But he can be that guy that can come off the bench, that can put up 10 points, with limited usage, who can grab a couple assists. And I think he's really an exceptional and above average rebounder at his size and position as well, which is something that can keep you in the league for a long time at the guard spot too.
Yeah, no, he has really underrated athleticism. If anybody remembers yesterday when he got fouled on that crossover and then caught it back and dunk it, it was like weird because the camera didn't pan with him. So it was kind of on the right of the camera angle, but it kind of showed off. Mike has a ton of bounce and he really is very athletic. And I think that is an advantage he has over a lot of guys his size. And like you said, it helps him in the rebounding game and just his overall ability to hang. I mean, you just really, as a guard, cannot have a great NBA career if you're not super athletic and you're not super fast unless you just shoot the crap out of the ball. And Mike does have those two things. And I agree. I think that'll really help his profile.
I think there's other individual players I want to touch on, but before we move into that, the thing that's been really, I don't want to say frustrating is probably too strong of a word for a team that's, been consistently ranked in the top 20 this year, but just the ability to kind of string together those games where you play well when you're supposed to play well. If you've been following the program, you see that when at Kansas, you see this team kind of clicking on all cylinders and you wonder, how the heck did they lose in Morgantown to a West Virginia team that was winless in Big 12 play? How did they let Iowa State, even though Iowa State's proven to be a very, very good basketball team, how did they let them get 3 offensive rebounds on the final possession and Kalsher to chuck up a 3 that ends up costing the Frogs that one? They just are still consistently dropping games that they're quote unquote supposed to win. even when you factor in this is the Big 12 and there are no gimmies, there are no, you're definitely going to take this one. What does this team need to do to kind of turn that switch on consistently and be not just a definitive NCAA tournament team, but a team that's legitimately in contention for a top 4 seed and maybe even a Big 12 title?
Yeah, I think these are all good questions because when you think about this team versus last year, it was a big question of have they taken a step forward? And I think something weird that happened over this offseason, and it's not a bad thing, but TCU played so well in the NCAA tournament, nearly knocked off what I thought was the best team in the nation at that point. Obviously, they ended up losing to Houston in the next round. But what after that, I think TCU fans plus the preseason hype kind of forgot about what happened last year. And if you think about what happened last year, yes, TCU exceeded expectations, but once they got into Big 12 play, they only won back-to-back games 3 times. And in whenever you play 18 games in a Big 12 schedule, only winning back-to-back games 3 times is just not a good sign at all. And I think it's a sign of how good the Big 12 was. But TCU finished 8-10 in conference play. So if you think about that now compared to this year, I think that's going to be a big key. Not only is the Big 12 better, but it's still a gauntlet, and you're still going to struggle with injuries. And I think we'll touch on that in a second. But TCU needs to string together wins. And this win was awesome. But when you think about, what happened last Wednesday, TCU just really needs to win on Tuesday against a very beatable OU team at home. So I think all of that is important. One, for context of remembering, yes, TCU's year last year was awesome, but they really struggled to string together wins. TCU's going to need to do that this year. And then 2, I think, finding added playmakers. Damian Ball entered as kind of the other playmaker of this year, and he's been good at times. Emmanuel Miller has been. Shahade Wells was awesome yesterday, had the game of his life. Of course, guys like Eddie Lankin, but then getting guys like Rondell Walker in while Micah Peavy's out. Having Micah Peavy come back fully healthy. I mean, this TCU team was built on Mike Miles last year, and they did well because of it. But you do not go to the Elite 8, much less the Final 4, much less win the best conference in basketball without being super well-rounded. And I think that's going to need to kind of be TCU's focus. And it sadly might cost Mike Miles a Big 12 Player of the Year bid, but I'll take that over a well-rounded team that goes much further in March than I think this Kansas team will if they don't figure out how to be more well-rounded around Jalen Wilson.
And I think Mike Miles would agree with you too. I think he'd much rather play in an Elite 8, or than be Big 12 Player of the Year. You talk about stringing together wins, the upcoming schedule for the Frogs as we record. Tuesday will have already happened by the time this posts. So they'll have Oklahoma at home. We'll hope that that'll be a back-to-back for them. You get that little kind of that SEC scheduling break, I would say almost. The SEC has some really good teams, but not the Big 12. They'll travel to Mississippi State, to Starkville. Should be interesting. Then you get West Virginia at home, at Oklahoma State, before you go on the road to Kansas State. And so if you can get those 3 wins in the row in conference, all 3 certainly winnable games, that's going to put the Frogs in a really, really good position. Where they stand right now is 5th in the Big 12 behind Iowa State, Kansas, Texas, and Kansas State still leads it at 6-1. But they're only, 2 games off the pace to catch up with the Wildcats. So I think obviously, this next 2 weeks is going to be critical for TCU to get those wins that you're supposed to get, and put yourself in a position to, maybe be a 3 seed in the Big 12 tournament, which could very easily translate to being a 3 or 4 seed in the NCAA tournament.
Oh, 100%. And I think an added factor that you think about added to yesterday, I've been saying when this team starts to shoot the ball well, they'll be scary. And I keep having people in my comments, well, Colin, there's no if they never can do it. Well, they shot 53% from 3 yesterday. So, yes, They can do it. They do have the ability to. They are one of the best teams in this conference at their ceiling, yet they shoot a Big 12 worst 29.8% from behind the arc. So we know it's possible, and I think that should scare teams that TCU is this good without shooting the ball well to this point.
Yeah, and I'll kind of piggyback on that too, as someone who's been around the game since I was 4 and coached the game since I was 16. I think the reason they're starting to shoot a little bit better from deep is early on in the season, a lot of those 3-pointers were coming in the half-court sets, and they were wide open, but they weren't necessarily set up. As this team has kind of found its groove playing fast, getting out in transition, they're getting more rhythm 3-pointers. And almost like 99% of basketball players and shooters shoot better in rhythm than they do kind of out of a set position. That's why guys like Reggie Miller, Steph Curry, and some of the elite 3-point, even Desmond Bain, the elite 3-point shooters in the league, you see them shooting coming off of screens or shooting it out of motion because it's just a lot easier of a shot to take. And so, yeah, I think those two things are not mutually exclusive. I think that as they've found their rhythm offensively out in transition and in more of a hurried up half court set, the shots start to fall. I don't see this team being an elite or even above average 3-point shooting team, but I agree with you. If they can just kind of get to, the national average for, top 50 teams in KenPom from behind the arc, then that to me is going to add another 5 to 10 points a game for a team that already has shown that they can kind of run by you and run through you. If they can start hitting, 38%, 37% as a team, they're going to be really, really dangerous come March. And I think that's something they have to do if they want to advance to the second weekend in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's really great insight on the 3-point shooting. I think, it's funny. Everything is the same within sports. We talked about why TCU was so good football-wise this year with a similar roster that went 5 wins last year. They learned how to put people in position to succeed. You look at this TCU team shooting-wise, it's not like they just mythically lost any guy that was able to shoot. But now we're seeing, look, Emmanuel Miller shoots a really high percentage from the corner. Let's get him looks there.
Yeah.
Jacoby Coles, literally lost 50 pounds this offseason, worked his butt off, and he shoots really well from the elbows. Like Mike Miles is going to – he's the type of guy that wants to shoot from one of the elbows, typically off the dribble. It's just like figuring those guys out. Chuck O'Bannon, but good from the corner as well, not as good from the wing. So trying to figure that out and put them in sets, as you said, Melissa, I think is super important, not only for just literal basketball terms, but for these guys' confidence. I think more than anyone, Chuck O'Bannon is a confidence guy. Mm-hmm. And, man, if he gets hot, like TCU has a really, really good chance to win in pretty much any game. And so I think that's a really good point. And we'll be interested to see if that's something they continue to improve on after yesterday.
I think a ton of credit goes to Jamie Dixon, too, because if you've listened to any of the broadcasts, people that haven't been at the games and watching them on TV, every single broadcaster to a person has said, man, this is not the way Jamie Dixon typically wants to play, but a ton of credit goes to him for going against his style and playing a style that works for his players. That's a huge, huge credit to him as a coach. You mentioned Emmanuel Miller. I want to talk about Emmanuel Miller. I think this guy legitimately might be one of the most underappreciated players, not just in the Big 12, but nationally. How has he become such a bigger piece of this team on both ends of the floor in year 2 in Fort Worth?
Yeah, I think what was interesting about last year is he was trying to kind of figure out his role. A lot of people forget that he led A&M in scoring with 18 points a game before he came to TCU. Now he's coming to a place where scoring-wise, last year he was probably 4th option most games, 5th option. And so I think that's really interesting when you think about last year. You got to remember that and think, man, Emmanuel kind of had a bit of a learning curve when he came to TCU of how to play. What I think is really interesting about him is the number one factor is he is the leader of this team. And I think what's cool is Miles has developed more leadership abilities. He's a naturally quiet guy. So that's really awesome, and I do want to applaud him for that. But Emmanuel Miller is the heart and soul of this team. And after they lost against Iowa State and then after they lost against Texas, he was the guy in the press conferences that was talking about motivation and how they needed to come back from these losses. After the Texas loss, he went on an entire rant about how life is just hard. Going to work, taking care of kids is hard. I was like, I don't know if I'm reading a book on 7 habits of effective people right now or listening to a college basketball player. And so anyway, I think that's super important to note is that he really gels this team together. But then I already mentioned the shooting. That's been super awesome. He's one of the top. He's been one. I don't know if he still is, but he shoots 58% from the field, which was one in the Big 12. It might still be for a really long time. He's averaging 14 points a game, which has just been super key for TCU as they've had different lineups coming in and out. And then he only shoots about 2 threes a game, but he's shooting 48%. And so people having to guard him out there as a big man who's super athletic, super fast, that opens up TCU's offense a lot and allows him to get to the rim and have that kind of efficient, close to the basket offense that he has. So he's a really complete player, also a great rebounder. I think besides Lampkin, probably the second best rebounder on this team, and just does pretty much everything. And he had a pretty bad game yesterday. And what's cool about that is I know Emmanuel Miller is really focusing on having an incredible outing on Tuesday, and he's not letting it get to him, which I can't say about everybody on this roster. And so, yeah, I just love everything about him. And I think if you put his attitude into a lot of guys in the country, they'd be a lot better. So
he's also probably has got to lead the team in deflections. Like that dude's hands are everywhere on the defensive side of the ball. He's had a couple of huge blocks too in key situations in Big 12 play. He really is, just like you said, a complete player. I've been kind of comparing him to like early Lamar Odom. That's kind of the NBA comp I get. He's obviously like Lamar Odom was a superstar. I'm not saying Emmanuel Miller is that, but when you look at the skill set and the ability to impact the game on both ends of the floor, both those guys do similar things. And I don't see any reason why Emmanuel Miller can't kind of be a guy that carves out a role of professional basketball with the abilities that he has on both ends of the floor. You kind of dropped in a little something there that I'm going to press you on now is the mentality of this team. I think we saw it very early in the season. It's really easy when you're not any good to just go into work and do your job. It gets really hard when the lights start to turn on and shine bright. This team returned a lot, but it seemed like there was not a lot of maturity early on. Is that something that you, as someone who's kind of connected to those guys personally, has seen that maturity grow? Have they kind of settled into, we can't read the press clippings, we can't look at our ranking, we have to go out and take care of business? Or do you think that is still a concern as you kind of turn the corner down the stretch and you start getting ready for postseason basketball?
No, I think you're definitely right about the beginning of the season. And what's interesting is can't share all of this story or who was involved, but I was told that when the strength and conditioning, the new guy for TCU basketball, Gary Christopher, came in, his official title is associate director of human performance, but he does what Kaz does for the basketball team. When he came in this summer, he was forcing dudes to actually work. And I don't know if that was super appealing, let's just say, to some of the guys on the team. And I think we could see that when the season started. And I don't really buy the fact that this team was just so bad in Northwestern State. I mean, Mike was out, Damian was out, and Northwestern State just played their mind off. But you saw at the beginning of the year, there seemed to be this mentality issue. And I just kept seeing these elements, people on the bench frustrated, arguing with each other, was hearing that they were pissed. Plus, people were injured. And it just seemed like, man, are they going to get focused? And I think a couple of things that I've learned over the course of the year is that, yes, like they've gotten really focused because they've seen how good they can be. One, I've learned that since that happened this summer, Coach G, they call him, or Gary Christopher, has become a player favorite within the program. They love him. He's like a friend to them, but he also has done wonderful things for them, their bodies, and their ability to run up the floor, as we've seen in their nation-leading fast break effort. And then also, you see guys caring about one another and also caring hard about losses. And I think that's important. I already mentioned the way Miller talked after Texas, but even more than that, I mean, I just heard that after the Texas game and even this week after they lost to West Virginia, I mean, guys were just pissed because they know what their ceiling is. And it's not this like, woe is me type of piss. It's like, man, we're not going to do that again. Like, that's just not going to be the effort we put forth again, because that's not who we are. And then I think, too, you see a guy that gets a lot of question for his attitude in Eddie Lampkin yesterday, going out there after halftime, a physically questionable decision. But you see the effort he's putting in, easily sat out. And I don't think TCU loses had he not played, but he still had a huge impact. He scored that awesome bucket. He was getting offensive rebounds. So this team has started to see who they can be, and I think that motivates them. And yes, there are a lot of guys on this team that do not have Emmanuel Miller's attitude, but I think that his confidence is breeds confidence, and they're really starting to gel and believe in themselves. And I don't think we're going to see, I could be wrong, but I don't think we're going to see a huge stretch of tough performances from this team like we did at points last season.
You mentioned Eddie Lampkin, and I think that what's been really interesting to me is the way that kind of the Eddie Lampkin, Jacoby Coles, Xavier Cork, kind of forward rotation has kind of fallen into a groove here over the last couple of weeks. Jamie Dixon doesn't necessarily have a traditional back to the basket post player. Eddie Lampkin's the closest thing to that, but I don't know that I'd call him traditional. But Xavier Cork and Jacoby Coles, another couple of really unsung heroes. You talked about the transformation that both those guys, I think, put in with their bodies this year. What have you seen as kind of their biggest improvement on the court, and how important are they to what TCU wants to accomplish deep into March?
Yeah, so I think to start there, I think Cork is probably the guy I think still has the most room to grow, and that's a good sign. TCU playing really well without him playing as well as I thought he would, to be honest. Over the offseason, I heard that he kind of dominated practices all the time. And so I think what's interesting about that is he's still getting over this learning curve of kind of trying to figure out, man, what's my role on this team. One thing I do want to point out about Cork is lately he's been doing a great job confidently of getting to the post. He's been getting to the foul line a lot consistently. He's only shooting a little over 60% from the foul line, but since Big 12 play started, he's consistently been hitting 2 for 2 from the line. So just little things I think do matter from Cork. But I think far and away the most improved guy on this team is Jacoby Coles, and he's only averaging 7.2 points a game on the season. But when you think about what he's done just since Big 12 play started, one, he just opens up the floor. But I mean, we're looking at games 8, 7, 6, 9, nothing crazy, but that spurt is really, really helpful because of his size. But now that he's lost the weight, his ability to move and stretch the floor, he shoots really well from 3. And I just heard that over the offseason, he just was really kind of dejected about the way last year went and was just kind of disappointed in how little he was able to contribute because he knew how good he was. And I've heard from Mike that just how good Jacoby was in high school, and it just kind of surprised me last year. And I think he worked really hard with his dad over the offseason to get some of that confidence back, lose weight, get in good shape, and it's really showing. So I think, yeah, those guys have just been awesome. And then, of course, Eddie, you mentioned Eddie. I mean, he hasn't improved statistically that much more from last year. He's averaging 1 more point and a couple more rebounds a game. But just the energy he brings, and he is so unpredictable in a good way. Of he could give you 17 or 18 a night, and I think his ability to get rebounds is really unreal. Like it just blows my mind every time I watch him because he just can maneuver his body and box out really well. And he really scares other teams on the sense that guys just hate, if you've ever played even just pickup basketball, you hate that guy that's always boxing out, that's always getting rebounds. And that's kind of what Eddie does. So yeah, those guys are huge for this team. And what's cool is you can win games with all of them scoring 5 or 6 points. But if any of them come out with double-digit points, I mean, that's just like a huge boost for this squad, especially if it comes on a day when one of the other 3 or 4 guys is kind of having an off day offensively.
I'll tell you that Eddie's one of those guys that I watch, and the only reason he doesn't average a double-double every night is because of Eddie. And I think that when he kind of gets over that hump of knowing, I think he's still kind of in that conserving energy kind of mode. And if he could ever just get it locked in for the full 40 minutes a night, that dude would be a double machine, and he's certainly capable of it. We've seen that in spurts and stretches, but again, it's just that same thing as the rest of this team. If they can do that consistently, the only thing that's stopping TCU right now, to me, is TCU. And I think all the pieces are there, and we're seeing that incremental improvement, and they've really locked it in for Big 12 play. But if they can string together like 2 great weeks, I think people could start getting really excited about the long-term potential. Do you have any information for us on Eddie's ankle? And Micah Peavy now has missed 4 games with no definitive sign of return for him. Do you know anything going on with their injury situations? How important is getting Micah Peavy back for this TCU team down the home stretch?
Yeah, I think I'll start with Micah. Once again, just a situation where can't share everything just for his privacy's sake, but on a sense of, I would just say TCU fans need to know that Micah Peavy's injury, it is a blessing how minor it was compared to what it could have been, what it was very close to being. And that is a really good thing. And so I think TCU has tried to protect optimism by saying game time decision. When they said game time decision for days or 4 games ago, I knew he wasn't playing, and
Yeah.
I would expect he does not play. I'm almost certain he won't play Tuesday. Would be shocked if he plays Saturday. I would say next week, or so 10 days from now is probably the best target, but I would not be surprised if he misses a few more weeks. And that's okay. TCU's playing great. I mean, their defensive efficiency, whatever it's called on Ken Palm, is up to 14 right now. I mean, they are one of the best defensive teams in the nation. To your point, though, I think he will add a really awesome on-ball defender with length that can guard a guy like Jalen Wilson when it gets down the stretch. So really helpful to get him back. Plus, he was getting some offensive groove. So the good news is you don't need him. The bad news is you could be a lot better with him. As far as Eddie goes, I talked to him today, and he said he just doesn't know yet about Tuesday. And so been waiting to get and obviously by the time people listen to this podcast, I guess we'll know about Tuesday already. But I would just say he's optimistic, as he always is. He was wearing a boot last night when he got back to Fort Worth, but waiting to hear a full report after they practice today, and we'll figure that out. I would say I do not expect him to play Tuesday, and would assume he plays Saturday. But I hope I'm wrong, and I think TCU could really use him against an OU team that doesn't have much dominant presence inside.
And Mike's got a little bit banged up Saturday too. It looked like after the game he was moving around fine. Anything we need to be concerned about with him and his health going forward?
No, Mike, that was just cramps. He hits the ground way too much. We know this. So he's fine. He was doing great yesterday. I would say yesterday was probably one of the best days of Mike's time at TCU as far as how he was feeling. He had an awesome day and just loved everything about yesterday. No, he's fine.
Oh, I think having Mike as the post-game interview on that national, in front of a national audience, a national stage on CBS, that's a great ambassador for TCU. His smile and how genuinely happy he was. Like a lot of players in that situation kind of give it's just another day. Mike let people know how important this was for TCU. And I think that his personality, he is, like you said, a quieter guy by nature, but when he lets that personality out, he's a great ambassador for TCU. Colin, as we kind of turn the corner, TCU will have played everybody once here pretty quickly, I think by the end of the week. What are your expectations for the Horned Frogs the second half of the Big 12 season and as they start to think about the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I think what I said about stringing together wins is just going to be super key. But I think what you said about this stretch is really important. You got to win the games that you are supposed to, but specifically at home. And so TCU on this stretch, they get Oklahoma, Mississippi State, and I believe they get Oklahoma State as well. And just a stretch where you need to win games. So, yeah, I expect TCU realistically to finish as high as second or third in the Big 12. I'm kind of waiting to see if Kansas State hits a learning curve or if they're as good as we think they are. I still expect Kansas to finish as the best team in the conference. We'll see about that. But I think this team could absolutely be a 3 or 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. But 2 factors that will really affect that: 1, health. Can they stay healthy? And then 2, are they able to capitalize on a couple of things that I think are going really well for them right now when it comes to low turnover margin and then high shooting in the Kansas game? Those 2 things need to stay good for TCU to string together wins. So I think ceiling, like I said, is probably second or third in the Big 12 and a 3 or 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. But I will say this team has potential to do even more than that. We'll just have to see, but it is a gauntlet in the Big 12, and so very scary, and we'll kind of have to just see how things shake out.
Last question, based off of last season, based off of what we've seen this season, what is the minimum baseline TCU has to reach in order to consider this year a success? Do they have to make the Elite 8? Do they have to, get to the Sweet 16? Like, what do you think is a realistic, but the bare minimum that they have to do for you to look back and say, yeah, this TCU team reached its potential or maybe exceeded it?
Yeah, I think for Big 12 play, you have to hit 500 or better, which would be a slight improvement from last year. I think they can win 12, 13 games in Big 12 this year. So I think you need to do that because this team has not done that in a long time. And then 2, to me, to be a success, I think you just need to win a tournament game. And I know fans aren't going to love me saying that because every year you feel like you need to just keep going up. The NCAA tournament is so unpredictable, and it's so hard to tell how good your team actually was just based on what happens on a neutral court in March. I think the regular season is much more telling. However, you can't go lose in your first game with as talented as this team is, especially if they're a 3 or 4 seed. So I think to be a major success, yes, you get to the second weekend. But I think as long as you win your first game and go 500 or better in Big 12 play, this team is showing significant improvement, and the trend is up for this program.
Colin, thank you so much for your time. Tell people where they can find you on social media. I know it's limited at this time, and also where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can find me at Colin with 1 LP_3 on Twitter, and then at Horn Frog Blitz. I write for Jeremy Clark over there. He does a great job on football, and I do some basketball stuff. So any tidbits I have on basketball will be there. So yeah, you can find my work there, and also just love what Melissa and Fox Today are doing. Their content is just amazing and some of the best when it comes to covering TCU with the entire Big 12.
Oh, look at you throwing a plug in for me while I'm trying to plug you. That's why we love you, Colin. Thanks so much for joining us today. We look forward to watching TCU basketball, see if they can reach those goals down the stretch.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. Go Frogs.